He slammed both hands onto her chest and pushed hard, rhythmic, relentless while every doctor in that hallway stood frozen. "Get back!" someone shouted. "He's just a security guard." But Ethan Ward didn't stop. He counted compressions under his breath, jaw-locked sweat rolling down his temple eyes, burning with the kind of focus you don't learn in a classroom. You learn it in a war zone. She was dying. And he was the only one who refused to let her. What happened next didn't just save a life, it destroyed every assumption that room had ever made about a man like him. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. You don't want to miss what comes next. The night shift at St. Haven Medical Center started the same way it always did. Quiet. Cold. Fluorescent lights humming like they had somewhere else to be. Ethan Ward clocked in at 10:47 p.m., hung his jacket on the hook inside the security office, and poured himself a cup of coffee that had been sitting on the burner since noon. He drank it anyway. He'd had worse. "You're 3 minutes late," said Dale, the day shift guard, already halfway out the door with his coat buttoned wrong. "Traffic on the 9, Ethan said. "You don't drive. You take the bus." "Bus hit traffic." Dale squinted at him, then shrugged like he'd learned long ago not to argue with Ethan Ward about anything that didn't matter. He pushed through the side door and let the cold November air rush in for a second before it closed behind him. Ethan stood alone in the office. He picked up the clipboard, checked the round schedule, noted that the East Corridor camera on the 3rd floor was still glitching. He'd reported it twice already. Noted that the vending machine near the ICU waiting room had been jammed open since Tuesday and nobody had fixed it. He wrote it down again anyway. That was Ethan. He wrote things down. He documented. He paid attention to the things other people didn't think were worth their time. Nobody at St. Haven really knew who Ethan Ward was. They knew the surface version. 40 years old, though he looked older some days and younger on others depending on how much sleep Grace had let him get. Black man. Quiet. Always wore his uniform like it was pressed even when it wasn't. Said yes sir and no ma'am to everyone, not because he was soft, but because his grandmother had beaten manners into him before he was old enough to have opinions about it. He brought his own lunch. He never called in sick. He didn't complain. That was all most people needed to know, and Ethan had stopped expecting anything different. He started his first round at 11. The hospital at night had its own rhythm. Different from the day. Less frantic, more mournful somehow, like the building itself was exhaling. The maternity ward up on 4 was usually the brightest spot, emotionally speaking. New Life had a way of cutting through the sterile sadness of everything else. Ethan always walked a little slower up there. Not because the protocol required it, because he liked it. He had a daughter. Grace, 9 years old with her mother's eyes and his mother's stubbornness, which meant she was basically unstoppable. She was at home right now, asleep under the care of Mrs. Delgado from apartment 4C, who charged him $40 a night and always left the TV on too loud, but who also genuinely loved Grace like her own grandkid. That was worth more than Ethan could calculate. He thought about Grace as he walked the 2nd floor corridor. He thought about her a lot during night shifts. About the permission slip for her science fair that was still on the kitchen counter. About whether she'd eaten the leftover pasta he'd put in the fridge, or if she'd talked Mrs. Delgado into ordering pizza again. About how she'd asked him last week out of nowhere standing in the bathroom doorway while he shaved, "Daddy, do you ever miss being a soldier?" He'd taken a second longer with the razor than he needed to. "I was a medic, baby. Not exactly a soldier." "But you were in the war." "I was in a few places, yeah." "Did you save people?" He'd rinsed the razor. Looked at her reflection in the mirror. She had the most direct gaze of any child he'd ever seen. No filter, no softening. Just the question hanging there. "Sometimes," he'd said. "Not always enough." She'd accepted that. Because Grace was 9 going on 40, and she somehow understood which answers meant stop asking, and which ones meant, "I'll tell you when you're older." He was on the 3rd floor when his radio crackled. "Ward, you near the ER bay?" He pressed the button. "2 floors up, what's going on?" Got a multi-vehicle incoming. Mass casualty protocol might be activating. Doctor, Ewan wants all security on standby near the trauma entrance. Copy. On my way. He took the stairs. Not because the elevator was far, but because stairs were faster when it mattered, and something in his chest had already shifted into a register that he hadn't used in years. Not panic, not even urgency exactly. More like recognition, the feeling of a gear engaging. He pushed through the stairwell door into the ER receiving area at the same moment the ambulance bay doors blew open. 3 paramedics came through hard and fast, rolling a gurney that was moving too quick for anything good. The woman on it, young mid-30s, expensive clothes, now shredded and soaked through, had an oxygen mask over her face, and a paramedic's hand pressed to her left side, and even from across the room, Ethan could see the color was wrong. Not just pale. Ashen. The particular gray that a body turns when it's deciding whether to keep fighting. Blunt force thoracic trauma. The lead paramedic called out, scanning for someone in scrubs. Possible tension, pneumo BP's tanking. Where's the attending? A nurse rushed forward. Dr. Keene is scrubbing in 30 seconds. We don't have 30 seconds. Ethan had already crossed the room. He wasn't thinking about his job title. He wasn't thinking about protocol or chain of command, or the fact that he was a security guard in a blue uniform and the paramedic was looking past him like he was furniture. Some part of his brain had simply done a calculation time-distance risk need, and the answer had come back the same way it always had in the field. Move. What's her pressure? He asked, stepping up to the gurney. The lead paramedic looked at him. Sir, you need to step back. Systolic. What is it? Something in his voice stopped the man. Not loudness, not aggression, just certainty. The kind of certainty that doesn't ask for authority because it doesn't need to. 70 over palp, the paramedic said, almost automatically. Ethan's hands were already moving. He pulled the oxygen mask slightly, looked at her neck veins distended, checked her trachea, deviated. He pressed 2 fingers just below her left clavicle. Felt the absence of breath sounds without a stethoscope, the way you learn to after you've done it in a field tent in the dark with gunfire 40 meters away. Tension pneumothorax, he said. Left side. She needs decompression now, before Keene gets here. You can't, the nurse started. Do you have a 14-gauge needle, large bore angiocath? A beat of paralyzed silence. Do you have it or not? He asked, and his voice was so utterly calm that it was somehow louder than shouting. Yes, we have it. Get it. The woman on the gurney made a sound, not a scream, more like a word trying to become a scream and failing halfway. Her hand came up, not grabbing, just reaching fingers spread, and it landed on Ethan's forearm. He looked down at her. Her eyes were open. They were brown. She was fighting to focus them on him, and he could see the effort it cost her, like trying to read something in a language you half remembered. Hey, he said. Quiet. Just for her. I've got you. Stay with me. She made that sound again. He realized she was trying to speak. He leaned closer. Fast, she managed. Please, just make it fast. He held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Done, he said. The nurse pressed the sealed kit into his hands. He tore it open with his teeth, uncapped the needle, found the second intercostal space at the midclavicular line, the same way his hands found the coffee pot in his dark kitchen every morning, by memory so deep it lived in the muscle, not the mind. He looked at her one more time. She was still watching him. Sharp pressure, he said. Then it'll ease. Ready. She closed her eyes. One slow blink. Yes. He went in. The rush of air was immediate, a faint hiss that meant the pressure was releasing, that the collapsed lung had room to re-expand, that the heart wasn't being crushed anymore. Her oxygen saturation ticked up on the monitor. Her BP began slowly, tentatively, like it wasn't sure it was allowed to climb back towards something survivable. What the... someone said from the doorway. Dr. Keene had arrived, still pulling on his gloves. He took in the scene in pieces. The gurney, the patient, the improving numbers on the monitor, the nurse standing there holding an empty packaging wrapper, and the man in the security uniform stepping back from the bed with a 14-gauge angiocath in his hand. "Who?" Keene started. "Tension pneumo left side just decompressed," Ethan said, setting the needle in the sharps tray like he'd been doing this in hospitals his whole life. BP was 70 over palp on arrival, deviated trachea, distended neck veins, absent breath, sounds left. She needs a chest tube and she needs it before you do anything else. Keene stared at him. "Sir," Ethan said. "Chest tube." The doctor moved. "You didn't argue with that voice. Nobody in that room argued with that voice." Ethan stepped back. He peeled off the single glove he'd pulled on and dropped it in the waste bin. He straightened his uniform jacket. He looked at the woman on the gurney one more time. Her color was already better. The gray retreating from her face, her chest rising with something closer to real breathing, and then he walked back to the corner of the room where security guards were supposed to stand, and he stood there and he was quiet. 2 nurses were looking at him. He didn't look back. Her name was Olivia Hart. He didn't know that yet. He learned it the same way everyone else on the overnight shift learned it 40 minutes later, when Marcus Chen walked through the ER entrance in a cashmere coat that cost more than Ethan's monthly rent, flanked by 2 men in suits who were clearly not hospital security, and announced to the nursing station with the precise energy of a man who expected desks to move out of his way. "Olivia Hart. She was brought in approximately an hour ago. I'm her chief of staff. I need to know her condition, and I need to know it right now." A young nurse named Priya, first year, still a little wide-eyed at everything, looked at Ethan from across the room with an expression that said, "Who is this person, and why is he talking like that?" Ethan had seen the name on enough business publications left in the waiting room. Hart Tech Industries. The wunderkind CEO who'd built a billion-dollar health tech company before she was 35. He'd seen her face on a magazine cover that someone had left on a waiting room chair 3 weeks ago, though he hadn't paid it much attention at the time. He paid attention now. Marcus was still talking, his voice getting sharper, as the on-call administrator tried to explain HIPAA protocols to a man who clearly felt that HIPAA was a policy for other people. "I don't need her medical details," Marcus said crisply. "I need to know if she's stable, that's all. Is she stable?" "She's in surgery," the administrator said carefully. "She's been stabilized." "How?" "She was." Marcus caught himself. Recalibrated. "The paramedics said she was critical." "She was." A quick intervention turned things around before the trauma team was fully on scene. Marcus narrowed his eyes. "What intervention? Which doctor?" "It wasn't a doctor." The hallway got quieter. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. The administrator glanced in Ethan's direction. Just briefly, barely a flicker, but Marcus caught it. He turned. He looked at Ethan, really looked at him the way people like Marcus Chen rarely bothered to look at people like Ethan Ward, and his expression went through 3 or 4 different emotions before settling on something carefully neutral. "The security guard," Marcus said. Not a question. Almost not even a sentence. Just 3 words arranged in a row with the weight of an entire worldview behind them. Ethan met his eyes, said nothing. Marcus walked toward him, slowly, like the distance was a choice he was making deliberately. "You intervened with Ms. Hart." "I provided emergency stabilization until the attending arrived," Ethan said. "You're a security guard." "Yes." "And you decided to—" Marcus paused. He had the look of a man who had many words available to him and was choosing between them very carefully. "Perform a medical procedure on one of the most prominent CEOs in the country." "I performed a needle decompression on a patient in acute tension pneumothorax," Ethan said. "The alternative was watching her die while we waited for someone with the right badge." Marcus stared at him. Ethan stared back. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. "Ward. Ethan Ward." Marcus pulled out his phone, typed something. And your background training. Army medic, 3 tours. Marcus looked up from the phone. Something shifted in his face, not warmth exactly, but a recalibration, like a machine adjusting its parameters. You're going to need to speak with hospital administration first thing tomorrow morning, Marcus said. And I'm going to need you to not discuss what happened tonight with anyone, media colleagues, no one. Can you agree to that? Ethan looked at him for a long moment. I don't talk about my work, Ethan said simply. Never have. Marcus nodded once, sharp and efficient. Good. He turned to walk away, then stopped. Didn't quite turn back. Just angled his head slightly, like he was directing the next words at the wall rather than at Ethan. She's going to make it, because of what you did. I want you to know that. Ethan said nothing. Marcus walked away. At 4:15 in the morning, Ethan called Mrs. Delgado to check on Grace. She answered on the third ring, groggy and a little irritated, and told him Grace was fine. She was sleeping. She'd eaten the pasta and only asked for pizza once, and could he please stop calling before 5 a.m. on nights he knew she was staying over. Sorry, he said. Won't happen again. You say that every time. I mean it every time. He could hear her smiling through the phone. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Mrs. D. He sat on the bench outside the east entrance, the one nobody used at this hour, and drank the last of his cold coffee and looked at the parking lot lights bleeding orange into the dark sky. He was thinking about the way she'd looked at him. Olivia Hart. The way her hand had found his arm without knowing whose arm it was. The way she'd said please, like she meant something deeper than just the procedure. Like she was asking to be held to the earth by whatever force was willing to hold her. He'd heard that before. Not the exact words, but the underneath of them. The please don't let me go that came out sideways in a trauma bay when someone's body knew what their mind couldn't fully process yet. He'd heard it in a tent in eastern Afghanistan from a 22-year-old specialist, whose name he still said sometimes in the quiet of a 3 a.m. he couldn't sleep through. He'd heard it once from his wife, not in a trauma bay. In an ordinary car, on an ordinary Tuesday, on a road that wasn't supposed to be dangerous. He hadn't been there for that one. That was the thing he lived with. Not guilt exactly, he'd been through enough therapy, mandatory and otherwise, to understand that it wasn't his fault that he couldn't have known that there was no universe in which he should have been in that car, instead of picking Grace up from daycare. He understood all of that intellectually. He carried it anyway, because understanding something didn't mean it didn't weigh anything. He finished the coffee, crushed the cup, stood up, walked back inside. He had 2 more rounds before sunrise. He did not tell Grace about Olivia Hart. He dropped her off at school the next morning, 3rd grade Westbrook Elementary, 12 blocks from their apartment. They walked it every day unless it rained, and sometimes even when it did. And she talked the entire way about the science fair, about how her project on water filtration was definitely better than Dylan Park's project on volcanoes, because volcanoes were overdone and everybody knew it. Overdone, Ethan said. Daddy, every kid does volcanoes. It's a cry for help. He laughed. Actually laughed out loud, which didn't happen as often as he wished it did. Where did you hear that? Mrs. Delgado watches a lot of cooking shows. They say overdone about everything. He squeezed her hand at the corner. She squeezed back automatically, the way she'd done since she was small enough to disappear in his palm. You're going to win, he said. Obviously, she said. Then, with the particular 9-year-old sincerity that could break him open without warning, but it's not about winning, it's about the science. He watched her walk through the school doors until they closed behind her. Then he stood on the sidewalk for a moment, in the November cold, hands in his jacket pockets, and allowed himself the 10 seconds of raw feeling he permitted himself each morning after drop-off. The love so large it had nowhere to go. The fear that rode behind it like a shadow. The knowledge that she was the reason for everything, the job, the apartment, the coffee that tasted like motor oil, the rounds at midnight down corridors where people were fighting to stay alive. All of it was for her. 10 seconds. Then he put it away and walked to the bus stop. The call from hospital administration came at 2 p.m. He'd been expecting it. He'd slept 4 hours, which was enough, and he was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing Grace's water filtration notes. She'd asked him to check her math when his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Mr. Ward. This is Patricia Osei, Deputy Director of Operations at St. Haven. Do you have a moment? Yes, ma'am. I'll be direct. We've had a conversation with Marcus Chen, who represents Ms. Hart, as well as our Chief Medical Officer. There's a question of protocol regarding last night's incident. I understand, Ethan said. A pause. You do? I performed an invasive procedure without a medical license or direct physician supervision. That's outside my scope as security personnel. I'm prepared to accept whatever consequence the hospital determines is appropriate. Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Ward, Patricia Osei said, and her voice had changed slightly less administrative, more human. Dr. Keene's report confirms that your intervention was both technically correct and almost certainly the reason Ms. Hart survived to reach the OR. The Chief Medical Officer has reviewed your military records, which I'll note are quite extensive. Ethan was quiet. The hospital is not pursuing disciplinary action, she said. In fact, we would like to discuss options. There may be an opportunity for a different kind of role if you're interested. Something more in line with your actual qualifications. He looked at Grace's notes on the table, her handwriting careful and large with little arrows she'd drawn between the filtration layers. I appreciate that, he said. Can I think about it? Of course. I'll be in tonight for my shift. We can talk before I clock in if that works. That works perfectly. He hung up, sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he picked up Grace's notes and checked her math. It was right. It was all right. He wrote perfect checkmark at the bottom in big letters because she deserved to see that when she got home. The woman in room 412 didn't know any of this. Olivia Hart woke up the afternoon after her surgery with a tube in her chest, a headache like a slow-moving freight train, and the absolute certainty that someone had saved her life in a way she hadn't fully understood yet. She remembered pieces. The impact, she never wanted to think about the impact again. The ambulance. The ceiling of the ER moving above her face. The oxygen mask that smelled like plastic and something antiseptic underneath. And hands. Calm, certain unhesitating hands. And a voice. Hey, I've got you. Stay with me. She remembered asking for speed. She remembered the word please coming out of her like something involuntary, not a request, but a prayer, not to anyone specific, just to the universe in general, to whatever was willing to listen. And he had answered. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know the blue uniform had been a security uniform. She didn't know that the hands belonged to a man who took the night bus home to a 9-year-old's water filtration project and cold coffee, and an apartment that was just large enough for the two of them to live a life in. She knew only what the hands had felt like, and she knew in the particular way that near death clears away everything except the essential that she was going to find out who they belonged to. Marcus Chen had a habit of delivering bad news the way other people delivered good news efficiently, without ceremony, with the quiet confidence of someone who had already decided how the other person should feel about it. Olivia had hired him 6 years ago partly because of that quality. When you ran a company the size of Hart Tech, you needed someone who could tell you the truth without cushioning it into something soft and useless. But standing at her bedside in room 412 with the afternoon light coming through the blinds and the chest tube still doing its uncomfortable work, Marcus looked like he was choosing his words more carefully than usual. The security guard, Olivia said before he could start. Marcus blinked. I was going to ease into that. I've been awake for 2 hours. I've been thinking about it for 2 hours. The security guard. Who is he? Marcus set his leather portfolio on the chair beside the bed and sat down with the measured calm of a man who'd learned the hard way that arguing with Olivia Hart while she was upright and conscious was rarely worth the energy. His name is Ethan Ward, 40 years old, Army combat medic, 3 tours, 2 in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. 6 years of experience in field trauma medicine before he was honorably discharged. He's been working security at St. Haven for approximately 2 years. Olivia stared at him. He's a security guard. That's what I said. A combat medic with 3 tours of active service is working as a security guard in a hospital. People make choices, Marcus said, with the careful neutrality of a man who had opinions about those choices, but had learned to keep them filed under "not my business." Olivia looked at the ceiling for a moment. He has a daughter. Someone told me that one of the nurses this morning. Grace, 9 years old, single father. His wife passed away 5 years ago. She was quiet. The monitor beside her beeped its slow, steady rhythm, and she focused on it for a second like it was an anchor. He saved my life, Marcus. I know. Not theoretically. Not in the doctors did good work sense. I mean specifically, that man with his specific hands and his specific training made a decision in the specific moment when the difference between me being alive or not was measured in probably 2 or 3 minutes. And nobody knew he could do that. He was standing there in a security uniform, and everyone was looking past him like he was a piece of furniture. Marcus said nothing. He had the expression of a man who agreed with every word, but wasn't sure where it was going. I want to meet him, Olivia said. That can be arranged tonight, before he clocks out, or in, or whatever the schedule is. I want to meet him before I lose my nerve about this. Olivia, you have a chest tube. Marcus. He picked up his portfolio. I'll find out his shift schedule. She looked back at the ceiling. And don't make it a thing. Don't send anyone ahead of me. No PR, no cameras, no prepared remarks. I just want to talk to the man. You're the CEO of a billion-dollar company. Everything you do is a thing. Then this will be the exception. She turned her head to look at him directly. Please. He recognized that word. She almost never used it. Fine, he said. But you're taking the wheelchair. She opened her mouth to argue. Chest tube, he said. Wheelchair, non-negotiable. She closed her mouth. Ethan was walking the second-floor corridor at 6:47 p.m. He'd clocked in early, which was not unusual, and had already met briefly with Patricia Osei, who'd been professional and kind, and had laid out 3 possible options for a role transition that he'd promised to consider when he heard wheels behind him. He turned. The woman in the wheelchair was pale and moving carefully like someone who was very aware of every part of her body and the cost of each movement. She was wearing a hospital gown with a sweater pulled over it that someone, probably Marcus given its quality, had clearly brought from wherever her things had been taken after the accident. Her dark hair was pulled back simply. She had no makeup on, no jewelry, no armor of any kind. She looked, Ethan thought, like a person, not a CEO, not a magazine cover, just a person who had been through something and was still finding the edges of herself on the other side of it. Behind her, a nurse held the IV pole. Marcus Chen stood a few steps back, holding the portfolio, keeping a very studied distance that Ethan suspected was intentional. Olivia Hart looked at him and stopped. Not the chair stopping. Her stopping something and her going still in the same way a person goes still when they recognize something they weren't expecting to recognize. You, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even quite a statement. It was the sound a person makes when they find something they'd been looking for without knowing they were looking for it. Ma'am, Ethan said. He kept his voice neutral and his hands at his sides. You should probably be resting. I've been lying down for 19 hours. You had surgery. I'm aware of that, thank you. She held his gaze. Your hands. He didn't react. He'd learned a long time ago how to receive things, words, looks, grief, gratitude, without showing the full weight of receiving them. You kept them very still, she said, when you did what you did. I remember thinking, even while it was happening, that your hands weren't shaking at all. I've never seen hands that didn't shake in a moment like that. Shaking hands are usually a problem, he said. Most people would have been afraid. Being afraid doesn't mean you shake, he said. And not shaking doesn't mean you're not afraid. She studied him. He let her. After a moment she said, "Were you afraid?" He considered the question honestly, the way he'd always tried to answer honest questions. "Not in the way you mean. Not for myself. For me." He met her eyes. "I was focused." "That's not an answer. It's the truest one I have." A beat of silence. The nurse shifted the IV pole slightly, and the wheel of the chair made a soft sound against the floor. Down the hall, someone was being paged over the intercom, and the hospital kept breathing around them, indifferent and continuous. "I don't know how to thank you for this," Olivia said. "I've been trying to figure out the right words since I woke up, and I haven't found them. Everything I come up with sounds like something I'd say in a press release." "You don't need to thank me," he said. "That's absurd. I was doing my job. Your job is security, Mr. Ward. I looked up your employment file." Something in him sharpened almost imperceptibly. "Then you know what my qualifications are." "I know what your title is," she said. "Those are two very different things, as we've apparently just demonstrated." She paused. "Why are you here in this job, I mean? With your background?" It was the kind of question people asked sometimes. He'd learned to answer it in a way that was true without being the whole truth, because the whole truth required a level of intimacy that he didn't extend to most people, and certainly not to strangers in hospital corridors, regardless of what they'd been through together. "I have a daughter," he said. "She was 4 when I got out. She needed a father who came home every night." Olivia absorbed this. Her expression was careful, not with the carefulness of politeness, but the carefulness of someone who understood the specific gravity of what had just been said. "What's her name?" she asked. "Grace." Something passed across her face. "How old?" 9. Is she taken care of tonight, I mean?" She caught herself. "I'm sorry, that's presumptuous. I don't know your arrangement." "She's fine," Ethan said. "Mrs. Delgado. She watches Grace when I work nights. They're probably watching cooking shows right now and arguing about whether the pasta was seasoned enough." The corner of Olivia's mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. "I had a nanny," she said. "Growing up, her name was Bertha. She used to make me watch cooking shows with her and tell me I needed to learn how to feed myself, because no husband was going to do it for me." "Sounds like Mrs. D," Ethan said, and he heard himself say it heard the small warmth that had gotten into his voice without permission and recalibrated very slightly. "Did she teach you to cook?" Olivia asked. "No, Army did. You learn fast when the alternative is MREs." She almost laughed. He saw it the way her shoulders started to move, and then caught on the pain from the tube and stopped. "Don't make me laugh," she said. "It hurts." "I'll try to be less interesting." This time she couldn't help it, a short, sharp exhale that was definitely a laugh, regardless of the discomfort it cost her, and she pressed her hand carefully to her side and looked at him with an expression that was equal parts exasperation and something warmer. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something simpler, maybe. Someone I could say thank you to and shake hands with and move on feeling like I'd handled it properly." "And now?" She looked at him steadily. "Now I think handling it properly is going to be more complicated than I thought." He didn't answer that, not because he didn't have anything to say, but because some things were better met with silence until you understood exactly what the situation was asking of you. Marcus materialized at Olivia's shoulder with the timing of a man who'd been watching a clock. 10 minutes, he said quietly, but unmistakably. Olivia ignored him, which Ethan suspected was a habit. "The hospital administration called you today," she said to Ethan. It wasn't a question. "They did." "Patricia Osei." "Yes." "She's good," Olivia said. "Smart fare. What did she offer you?" Ethan looked at her for a moment. That's between me and the hospital. Of course. She didn't push it. He appreciated that. I want to make my own offer. Through proper channels, nothing that bypasses anything. I'm not interested in doing this poorly. But I want you to know that it's coming, and that you should take it seriously before you decide anything. Ms. Hart. My company does health tech, she said. Emergency response systems, rural access platforms, training programs for first responders in underserved communities. I have a division that I'm trying to build out that works specifically on emergency care in communities that don't have enough of it. She held his gaze. I've been trying to hire someone to lead the field training component for 4 months. I cannot find the right person. And it turned out the right person was working the night shift in my own emergency room. Ethan was quiet. I'm not doing this as gratitude, she said, and her voice had shifted into something he recognized, the particular tone of a person who needed to be believed. I would offer you this job if you'd never met me in your life, if what I read in your service record is accurate. 3 tours. Decorated. You ran your own field unit for 14 months. You've saved more lives than most emergency physicians will see in a career. She stopped. You're wasted here, and I think you know it. He looked at her for a long time. I'll think about it, he said. Which, as Marcus Chen would have noted, was exactly what Ethan had said to Patricia Osei. But the way he said it this time was different. Not more open exactly, more present. Like the words were actually landing somewhere instead of dissolving into politeness. That's all I'm asking, she said. The nurse touched her shoulder gently. Ms. Hart, the doctor wanted you back in the room by 7. I know. Olivia let herself be turned, let the wheelchair begin moving back down the hall. Then she stopped the wheels with her hands just once and looked back over her shoulder at Ethan. She's lucky, Your Grace, she said, to have someone who arranges his whole life around her like that. He didn't say anything. She nodded once like that was sufficient and let the nurse wheel her away. Marcus lingered for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to give Ethan a look that was not warm, but was not hostile, either the look of a man filing information, and then he followed. Ethan stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he finished his round. The next 3 days were strange, in the particular way that ordinary life gets strange when something has shifted in it that you can't fully name yet. Ethan went to work. He did his rounds. He checked on the East Corridor camera, which had finally been fixed. He ate his lunch in the break room and listened to the overnight staff talk about their lives, the nurse with the new baby, the orderly saving up for a car, the young radiology tech who was applying to medical school and was terrified about the interview process. He offered a word here and there. Nothing big. He wasn't that kind of person. But he was listening differently. He'd always listened, that was who he was. But something had shifted in what he was listening for. On the second night, Dr. Keene found him in the stairwell. Keene was in his late 40s, the kind of doctor who wore his authority like a second skin without seeming to notice it. He and Ethan had existed in the same building for 2 years and exchanged maybe 30 words total before the night of Olivia Hart's arrival. Now Keene stood on the landing above Ethan with his hands in his coat pockets and the look of a man who had prepared what he wanted to say and was slightly annoyed to find that the preparation hadn't made it easier. "Ward," he said. "Dr. Keene." Keene came down 1 step. "I owe you something." "You don't." "I was 30 seconds late." The words came out flat and hard like he was making himself say them without dressing them up. 30 seconds. And if you'd waited for me instead of... She would have coded before you got gloves on, Ethan said, not unkindly, just clearly. Keene absorbed this. Yeah, he said. Yeah, she would have. He paused. Where did you train? Army Medic School. Fort Sam Houston. Then field experience. Field experience. Keene said it the way people said things when the words didn't quite cover what was meant. 3 tours worth of field experience. Something like that. Keene nodded slowly. I reviewed your record, the one the CMO pulled. You ever think about going back to medicine? Formally, I mean. There are pathways, bridge programs for veterans. I've thought about it, Ethan said. And I have a daughter who's 9 and a schedule that makes any kind of extended program very complicated, and money that doesn't stretch far enough to cover both. Keene nodded again. He wasn't a man who offered easy reassurances, which Ethan respected. What Olivia Hart is building, he said carefully, is not small. I know her work. My hospital has been trying to get a partnership with HeartTech's Rural Access Program for 2 years. He looked at Ethan directly. If she offered you something, she offered me something. Then you should probably think hard before you say no. I said I'd think about it. Thinking is not the same as deciding. Keene pulled his hand from his pocket and held it out. Ethan looked at it for a moment, then shook it. Keene's grip was firm and quick. For what it's worth, he said, what you did that night was one of the cleanest needle decomp executions I've seen outside a controlled setting. Textbook plus. You must have done it 100 times. 63, Ethan said. Keene stared at him. I kept count, Ethan said. Every procedure, every patient. You keep count. It helps you remember that they're people. Keene was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, 63 people are walking around alive right now, partly because of your hands. Some of them, Ethan said. Not all of them made it. No, Keene said. They don't always. He turned and started back up the stairs. At the landing, he paused. Ward, take the meeting with Hart. Whatever it is she's building, it needs someone who counts. He disappeared through the stairwell door. Ethan stood for a moment in the quiet of the landing. He looked at his hands, turned them over once briefly the way he sometimes did late at night when he was very tired and the weight of things settled differently than it did in the daytime. 63. He thought about the 22-year-old specialist in the tent, about his wife's voice on the phone that last morning, ordinary and impatient, saying she'd be home by 6. And could he please remember to pick up Grace because she had a thing after work? He thought about all the ways a person's life arranged itself around loss without announcing that that was what it was doing. He thought about Grace's handwriting. Perfect. Check mark. He pulled out his phone and texted Mrs. Delgado. Can you stay Saturday? Might have a meeting? 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then, of course. Grace already told me she's teaching me about water filtration this weekend. He smiled. Actually smiled in the stairwell alone. Tell her not to fail you, he typed back. Too late, Mrs. Delgado replied. Already failing. These diagrams are very serious business. He pocketed the phone, went back to work. On the 4th day the story broke. Not through any failure of Olivia's instructions, or Marcus's considerable talent for information management. It broke the way things broke in a hospital through the accumulation of small conversations, a word here, a name there, the particular way gossip moved through a building full of people who spent long shifts processing other people's crises. Someone on the nursing staff told someone in admissions, who told someone in billing, who had a sister who worked adjacent to media in a way that was never quite traceable, but always effective. By Thursday morning, Ethan's name was in 3 separate news alerts on Marcus Chen's phone. 2 of them accompanied by blurry photos someone had taken on a cell phone in the ER corridor, grainy, indistinct, but clearly showing a man in a security uniform standing over a gurney with the posture of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The headline on the first one read, Security guard with military background saves billionaire CEO who is Ethan Ward. The headline on the second one was less restrained. Black single dad performs life-saving procedure on tech, CEO hospital silent. The third one just said, the man nobody knew. Ethan found out about the coverage when he arrived at the hospital for his Thursday night shift and found a reporter standing in the lobby. Then 2. Then, by the time he'd made it to the security office, to clock in 3, with a camera crew setting up near the entrance in a way that the hospital's communications director was already moving to intercept. Dale was still on shift in the process of handing off, and he looked at Ethan with an expression of deeply genuine surprise. "Man," he said. "Did you know any of this was coming?" "No," Ethan said. "You're on the news." "I see that." "Like actually on the news. CNN did a thing." Ethan hung up his jacket, picked up the clipboard. "Anything I need to know about the building?" Ethan, CNN. Dale, the clipboard. Dale stared at him for another second, then shook his head in the way of a man confronting something that refused to be comprehended and gave him the shift handoff. It was Marcus Chen who called him 20 minutes later, while Ethan was in the middle of noting for the third consecutive week that the vending machine near the ICU waiting room still needed servicing. "I'm sorry about this," Marcus said, and to his credit, he sounded like he meant it. "I tried to contain it. Hospitals are impossible to contain." "I know," Ethan said. "What does she want to do?" A pause. "She wants to talk to you before she decides anything. She's being discharged tomorrow morning. She asked if you'd be willing to meet her not here somewhere neutral. Coffee if you drink it." "I drink a lot of it." "Is that a yes?" Ethan looked at the vending machine. He thought about the job offer that was sitting somewhere between the surface and the depth of his mind, like a stone that hadn't finished falling yet. He thought about Patricia Osie's 3 options. He thought about Keen on the landing. He thought about Grace's diagrams. "Text me the time and place," he said. "She'll want to make a statement," Marcus said. "About what you did. Publicly. I've already had 3 media requests asking for her response. She won't be able to stay quiet about this." "She can say whatever she wants," Ethan said. "She doesn't need my permission." "She won't do it without your permission." A pause. That surprised me too, honestly. Ethan thought about the way she'd looked at him in the corridor. Not like he was a story, like he was a person, like she was paying attention to the difference. "Tell her I'll be at the coffee place," he said. "Whatever time works for her." 9 a.m. There's a diner called Morrow's on 5th and Clement. She likes the booth by the window. I'll find it. He hung up and looked at the vending machine for another moment. Then he wrote it on the clipboard. "Vending machine, ICU corridor. 4th request, escalate." He initialed it and moved on. By the time he finished his first full round, the reporters had been directed to the hospital's communications office, and the lobby was quiet again. But the story was out there now, moving through the world, with the particular velocity of things that touched people in the right place. The image of a man with a certain kind of history, a certain kind of sacrifice, standing in a uniform that didn't reflect what he actually was, and doing the thing he'd spent years learning to do anyway, for no reason, except that someone needed it done. That night, walking the 3rd floor past the maternity ward, Ethan passed a new father in the hallway. Young guy, barely 25, still wearing the expression of someone who'd been changed by something irrevocably and was still in the first minutes of understanding it. He was pacing slowly, coffee cup in hand, looking at his phone with the blank focus of exhaustion. He looked up as Ethan passed. "Hey man," he said. You're the guy. From the news. The security?" "Just doing my rounds," Ethan said. "No, but they said you—" The young man stopped, shook his head. "You have a kid." 9-year-old daughter." The young father looked at him, then looked back through the window into the room where his wife was sleeping, and in a bassinet beside her, something very new was breathing its first careful hours. "She okay?" "Your daughter?" "She's perfect," Ethan said. The young father nodded slowly with the gravity of a man to whom that word had just acquired its full weight. "Mine's a girl too," he said. "Just born. 4 hours ago." "Congratulations," Ethan said. "I'm terrified." "Yeah," Ethan said. "That's the right response." The young man laughed, a little unsteady, a little overwhelmed, a little full of something enormous he didn't have the words for yet. He looked at Ethan with a kind of gratitude that had nothing to do with anything Ethan had technically done for him. "Thank you," he said anyway. Ethan nodded, kept walking. The corridor was quiet. The lights hummed. Somewhere on the floor above, someone was probably being born, and somewhere in the city. Beyond the windows, someone was probably dying. And in between all of that, in every ordinary inch of the distance between those two things, people were holding on with both hands and hoping the hands they found to hold on to were steady. Ethan finished his round. He called Mrs. Delgado at 4 a.m., and she answered on the second ring this time, without the irritation. "She's fine," Mrs. Delgado said before he could ask. "She's fine. You're on the news." "I heard." "Grace doesn't know yet." "Good. Keep it that way until I can talk to her." "Ethan." Mrs. Delgado's voice was softer than usual. "I've known you 2 years. I didn't know any of that. About the war, the medicine. You knew what mattered," he said. A pause. "I suppose I did." Another pause, warmer. "Get some sleep when you get home." "I will." He wouldn't. He rarely did after a night like this, but it was good to be told. He sat on the bench outside the east entrance and looked at the parking lot lights going orange into the pre-dawn dark, and he thought about a diner on 5th and Clement, a booth by the window 9 in the morning, and a woman who had looked at him like he was a person and not a story, and had said somehow meaning both at once, "This is going to be more complicated than I thought." He thought she was probably right. Morrow's diner smelled like coffee and butter, and the particular comfort of a place that had been feeding the same neighborhood for 30 years without asking anything in return. Ethan arrived at 8:52. He always arrived early. It was a habit so deep it had stopped being a decision. The booth by the window was empty. He took it anyway. Ordered coffee. Black. No cream. A preference that had outlasted the war and the grief and everything else, and sat with both hands around the mug and watched the street outside. A city bus. A woman walking a dog that was too large for the leash she'd chosen. 2 kids on bikes who were definitely supposed to be in school. He was on his second cup when Olivia arrived. She came in with Marcus 2 steps behind her, and no wheelchair, which told him she'd won that argument. She was moving carefully, but upright, dressed in dark slacks and a gray coat. Her hair down now, and she scanned the diner, the way he'd noticed she did everything efficiently, missing nothing until she found him. She crossed the room and slid into the booth across from him without ceremony. "You're early," she said. "Habit," he said. "Me too. Marcus made me wait in the car for 6 minutes, so I wouldn't seem desperate." From 2 tables away, Marcus lifted his coffee cup without looking up. Ethan looked at him. "Is he going to sit there the whole time?" "Almost certainly," Olivia said. "He's protective. You'll get used to it." "I'm not sure I'll be around long enough to get used to it." She looked at him steadily across the table. "Is that a no to the offer? It's not a yes yet." "Fair." She wrapped both hands around her own coffee cup, same gesture he'd used, he noticed, and then immediately told himself not to read anything into symmetry. "How'd you sleep?" "Not great." "Me neither. The chest tube doesn't allow for much." She paused. "Also, I had 4 media inquiries waiting when I woke up, and a text from my board chair that said, and I quote, 'Please advise republic narrative before 10 a.m. What are you going to tell him? The truth," she said. "Which is what I tell him most of the time, and which he finds exhausting most of the time, and which is nevertheless my standard policy." She looked at Ethan. "I want to make a public statement. I want to tell what happened, including your name and your background. I want to do it cleanly on my terms, without the tabloid version getting there first." "The tabloid version is already out there," he said. "I know. The black single dad shocks everyone angle." She said it without flinching, but her jaw tightened slightly. "Which reduces what you did to something designed to make people feel surprised that a man like you could do a thing like that. I want to replace that story with the actual one." He looked at her. "What is the actual one?" that an extremely qualified combat medic named Ethan Ward, who has spent 6 years keeping himself invisible because he had a daughter to raise and a life to rebuild, was standing in the right place at the right time, and that his first instinct was not to wonder whether it was his job, but to simply do what needed to be done. She held his gaze. That's the story, and it's a better one. He was quiet for a moment. And the job offer is that part of the story. The job offer exists regardless of any statement. I'm not using one to justify the other. But they'd be reported together. Probably. Which means some people will say you hired me out of gratitude, not merit. Some people will say that, she agreed. Some people say everything. What I know is what your service record says and what I watched you do in that ER. And I know the difference between gratitude and recognition. He turned his coffee cup slowly. He did that when he was thinking a small methodical rotation once around, back to the start. Tell me about the position, he said. Specifically. Something in her settled, not relief exactly, more like the particular focus of a person shifting from persuasion mode into something more natural. The division is called Heart Community Response. It's not the flagship product, it's not what the board gets excited about, but it's the one I care about most. We've built emergency response tech for rural and underserved communities, apps, alert systems, remote monitoring. But the gap we keep hitting is human capital. The communities that need this most also have the least access to trained emergency responders. She leaned forward, slightly careful of her side. I need someone who can build a field training program. Go into communities, assess what they have, figure out what they need, design and deliver training that's actually usable by people without medical degrees. Community health workers, first responders, school nurses, paramedics in areas where the nearest hospital is 40 minutes away. Ethan was still. That's what you did, she said. For 3 tours. You trained people. You built protocols in field conditions with whatever resources existed. You made do. She paused. I need someone who knows how to make do and turn it into something that lasts. He looked at her for a long time. What's the title? Director of Field Training and Community Emergency Preparedness. You'd report to me directly. Salary, she told him. He absorbed the number with the composure of a man who had learned not to react visibly to things, but something behind his eyes recalibrated visibly enough that she caught it. And benefits, she said. Full family coverage. Flexible scheduling around Grace's school calendar. I cleared that with HR before this meeting. He set down his coffee cup. You cleared scheduling accommodations for a position you hadn't confirmed I'd accept yet. I was optimistic. Or presumptuous. Both are possible, she said. I'm often both. He almost smiled. What's the timeline if I said yes? 2 weeks notice to St. Haven. 4 weeks of orientation. First field assignment tentatively March, which gives you time to what's the science fair? He stared at her. How do you know about the science fair? Mrs. Delgado mentioned it. He stared harder. When did you talk to Mrs. Delgado? I called the hospital main desk and asked for the contact information for anyone associated with your emergency contact form. It seemed faster than guessing. She read his expression accurately. I know. It was too much. Marcus told me it was too much. I did it anyway. Ms. Hart, Olivia. You called my daughter's babysitter. I called the person listed as your household contact, yes. To ask about my daughter's science fair. To make sure she was all right, Olivia said, and her voice lost its crisp efficiency and became something simpler. You came to my ER and you saved my life, and then you went home alone and took care of a 9-year-old and went back to work the next night like nothing happened. I wanted to know she was okay. I wanted to know you were okay. A pause. Mrs. Delgado, for the record, said Grace is remarkable, and that you are, and I quote, the most stubborn man alive, but in the good way. Ethan looked out the window for a moment. The bus had made its return loop. The woman with the large dog was gone. She's going to win the science fair, he said to the window. I have no doubt, Olivia said. He looked back at her. If I say yes? When? She said. And then immediately, sorry, I'm doing it again. If I say yes, he said deliberately, I need to talk to Grace first. She's 9, but she's not a kid you make decisions around. She's a kid you make decisions with. That's how we do it. Olivia was quiet for a moment. He couldn't quite read her expression. It was something layered, like more than one feeling had arrived at once and was sorting itself out. That must be good for her, she said finally. Having a father who treats her like her opinion matters. It's the only way I know how to do it, he said. She nodded slowly. Okay. Talk to Grace. Take whatever time you need. She pulled a card from her coat pocket and slid it across the table. Not a business card, a plain card handwritten with a number on it. That's my direct line. Not the assistant, not the main office. Me. He picked it up, looked at the handwriting, quick but precise, the writing of someone who thought faster than their hand could keep up with. Olivia, he said, testing the name once as a kind of acknowledgement. She looked up. Why does this matter to you, not professionally? You have 50 projects. Why this one? She took a long moment before she answered. He appreciated that she didn't reach for the fast answer. I grew up in Granger County, she said. That's about 90 miles east of nowhere if you're not familiar. My mom had a cardiac event when I was 11. We lived 22 miles from the nearest hospital. The volunteer firefighters who responded had first aid training that was 12 years out of date, and one of them had never done chest compressions on anything but a dummy. She paused. She survived. Barely. The doctor told us afterward that if any of the responders had known one additional technique, the outcome would have been better, less damage. She looked at her coffee. I built this whole company partly because I'm still angry about those 22 miles. Ethan said nothing for a moment. 63 people, he said, and she looked up confused. That's how many needle decompressions I've done. I kept count. Every one of them. Because numbers are how I remember they were people. She stared at him. Your community program would need a tracking system, he said. Not just for outcomes, for individuals. Every person trained, every intervention they perform, every life that changes at the end of that chain. You want to make it mean something, you count the people. Olivia Hart looked at him for a long moment in the particular way of someone who has found a thing they needed without knowing what shape it would be in when they found it. Yes, she said quietly. Exactly that. Marcus appeared at the table with a fresh coffee carafe that he'd clearly requisitioned from somewhere. He poured without being asked and returned to his table. Ethan watched him go. He's good, Ethan said. Indispensable. Olivia agreed. He also thinks I'm making a mistake. The statement or the offer? Both. The statement because he thinks it opens me to liability and narrative complications. The offer because he thinks it looks like gratitude dressed up as business. She picked up her cup. He's not wrong about the complications. He's wrong about what it actually is, but he's not wrong that it'll look that way to some people. Does that matter to you? How it looks. 6 years ago, I would have said no, and I would have been lying. Now. She considered. I care about how it looks because perception affects my ability to do the actual work. The moment perception starts steering the actual work instead of just protecting it, that's when I have a problem. She looked at him. I'm not there yet. He nodded. The statement, he said. What does it say exactly? You want to see the draft? I want to know if I can say no to parts of it. She looked slightly surprised. Yes, absolutely. I wasn't planning to put anything in it you hadn't approved. Some people would. Some people are not me. He believed her. He wasn't entirely sure why, given that he'd known her for roughly 72 hours under the specific conditions of her nearly dying, which were not ideal conditions for character assessment. But he'd spent years reading people in situations where misjudging them had consequences. He trusted the reading. "Okay," he said. "Send me the draft." "I need your email." He wrote it on a napkin. She looked at it, the handwriting that was economical and clear, the address that was his first initial and his last name, and a number that was probably from when that combination was already taken somewhere. "I'll send it this afternoon," she said. "You can mark whatever you want changed and send it back. And if I want something taken out entirely, then it comes out." He nodded. They sat for a moment in something that was almost comfortable, the aftermath of a negotiation that hadn't quite felt like one, or had felt like one that both people were trying to win in the same direction. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask me anything." "Your accident, the other night. Was anyone else in the car?" Something crossed her face, fast, quickly managed, but he caught it. "No, I was alone." "What happened?" She looked at the table. "I fell asleep. I'd been in the office for 20 hours, and I knew I was too tired to drive, and I drove anyway because I had a 7 a.m. call and I wanted to be at my own apartment when I took it." A pause. The car went off the elevated ramp. Concrete barrier stopped it from going further. She looked back up. I know exactly how stupid it was. I wasn't going to say that. Everyone thinks it. I was going to say that I've seen what fatigue does to people in the field," he said. "It's not stupidity. It's a system failure. When the system, meaning your support structure, your schedule, whoever is responsible for making sure you don't drive yourself into a concrete barrier, fails you, that's not a character flaw. It's a structural problem." She looked at him steadily. "You sound like a doctor." "I sound like someone who's watched a lot of preventable things happen," he said. She was quiet. "Marcus has been trying to get me to hire a driver for 2 years. Marcus seems like a man with good instincts." "Maddening, but yes." She exhaled slowly. "I'm hiring the driver." "That's a good decision." "I make them occasionally." The corner of her mouth moved. "Ethan." He registered the first name again. It sat differently coming from her than it did from most people. He noticed that and set it aside. "Yes." "Thank you," she said. "Not for the job consideration, not for the statement. Just for that night. For not waiting. For not deciding it wasn't your problem." He looked at her. "It was always my problem," he said. "That's the thing people don't understand about medicine, or at least about the way I learned it. The moment you have the skill and someone needs it, the problem is yours. Doesn't matter what the job title says. Doesn't matter who's watching or what it costs you. The problem is yours." She held his gaze. There was something in her eyes, not sentiment, something more deliberate than that. Like she was taking careful note of something she intended to remember exactly. "Then I'm glad you were there," she said. He nodded once and drank his coffee. He got home at 10:37, and Grace was at school, and the apartment was quiet the way it only was between 7 a.m. and 3 p.m. on weekdays, a particular quiet that was full of her absence rather than just empty. Her backpack hook was bare. Her sneakers were gone from the mat. On the kitchen counter, the water filtration diagrams were organized into a new pile with a sticky note on top that said, "Daddy, do not move these," in very serious capital letters. He didn't move them. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, then he took out his phone and opened his contacts and scrolled past the small number of entries to a name he hadn't called in 4 months. His sister, Diane, in Atlanta. She called him regularly. He called her back less regularly, which was a failure he acknowledged and hadn't yet fixed. She answered on the first ring. "Ethan James Ward," she said with the precise intonation of a woman who had grown up in the same household as him and knew every note of every register his name could be delivered in. "I have been watching the news since 7:30 this morning." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't call sooner." "You saved a billionaire." "I did a needle decompression. I've done 63 of them." "Ethan." "Diane." "You're on CNN." "So I've been told." He pulled a chair out from the kitchen table and sat down. "I need to tell you what's happening before Grace comes home from school." Diane went quiet. When his sister went quiet, it meant she was paying the kind of attention that didn't need words. "There's a job offer," he said. "A real one. Director level. Building a field training program for emergency response in underserved communities." He told her the salary. The silence that followed was a different kind than before. "Ethan," she said finally. I know. That's your work. The actual work. The thing you used to talk about wanting to do. I know, Diane. Before everything happened, you used to say that's what you'd do someday. Build something that helped communities that were falling through the cracks. I remember saying that. And now someone is handing it to you and you're sitting in your kitchen sounding like a man waiting for the other shoe to drop. Her voice was steady and fierce and deeply familiar. Why aren't you happy? He thought about it. Really thought about it instead of answering with the surface version. I don't know if I trust something that arrives this fast, he said. I don't know if I trust something that feels this much like the thing I wanted, because in my experience, the things that feel like what you wanted have a way of... He stopped. Of what? He looked at the water filtration diagrams. Grace's arrows, her careful handwriting, her deep seriousness about the science. Of costing more than you planned, he finished. Diane was quiet for a moment. Then, Jordan cost you more than you planned, she said gently, but without flinching. And Jordan was the best thing in your life until she wasn't in it anymore. And after Jordan, you have Grace. And Grace is the best thing in your life. Her voice steadied. The things that cost everything have a way of being worth everything too, Ethan. That's just what they are. He pressed his thumb against the side of his coffee cup. Old habit. Grace doesn't know about any of this yet, he said. I need to tell her tonight. How do you think she'll take it? She'll ask me questions I'm not prepared for, he said. She always does. Get prepared, Diane said. And Ethan, call me after. I want to know what she says. You just want to hear what she says so you can repeat it back to me for the rest of my life. Obviously, she's 9 and she's wiser than both of us. Call me after. He smiled. It felt different than the stairwell smile, fuller somehow, less alone. I will, he said. Love you, D. Love you. Now go sleep before she gets home. You sound exhausted. He lay down on top of his bed with his shoes still on, which he never did, and he was asleep in 4 minutes, which was also unusual. Something had been released in him this morning that had been held tight for days, maybe longer. He didn't analyze it. He just let the sleep come. Grace woke him at 3:22 by sitting on the foot of his bed and saying with no preamble whatsoever, Daddy, Marcus at school told me you're famous. He opened his eyes. She was still in her coat backpack on, looking at him with the specific expression she used when she had information she needed explained. Marcus at school, he repeated. Not Marcus. Marcus Chen from your work is a different Marcus. My Marcus is Marcus Reyes, and he sits next to me in math, and he said his mom showed him a video of you on the news. Ethan sat up, looked at his daughter. She looked back with those direct, patient, unavoidable eyes. Okay, he said. Sit down. I need to tell you something. She dropped her backpack on the floor and sat cross-legged on the bed and folded her hands in her lap with the gravity of a small person who understood that folded hands meant I am listening seriously. He told her. Not the version for newspapers or press releases or HR documentation. The version for Grace, which meant the real version, the night the woman, the decision, the procedure, what the procedure meant, and why he knew how to do it, and where he'd learned it, and what 3 tours of making those decisions in worse conditions had cost and given him. She listened to all of it without interrupting, which was rare for her. When he finished, there was a short silence. Were you scared? She asked. Focused, he said. And then, because she would see through anything less, and maybe a little scared, yes. For her. Grace nodded, processing. Is she okay now? She's going to be fine. Good. Another pause. What's a needle decompression? He explained it simply. She asked 3 follow-up questions, each more specific than the last, with the relentless curiosity of a child who had inherited his habit of needing to understand how things actually worked. Then she said, "Are you going to take the new job?" He looked at her. "What do you think I should do?" She uncrossed her legs and looked at the window for a moment in exactly the way he did when he was thinking he'd never noticed that before, and the noticing hit him somewhere quiet. "I think," she said carefully, "that you went to the army to save people. And then you came home to save me. And maybe now—" She looked back at him. "Maybe now you can do both." He was very still. "Also," she said with the smooth gear shift of a 9-year-old moving from depth back to surface, "Mrs. Delgado said the lady called her and asked about my science fair, which is a little weird, but also she said the lady seemed really nice, so—" "She is nice," Ethan said, finding his voice. "Okay." Grace picked up her backpack. "I'm going to need you to look at my diagrams again. I changed the filtration layer order, and I need a second opinion from someone with science knowledge." "I'll be right there," he said. She hopped off the bed and padded to the kitchen, already pulling her diagrams from the folder she'd clearly been reorganizing on the bus ride home. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed for a moment. His hands were in his lap. He turned them over once briefly, the way he sometimes did. Then he stood up, and he went to look at the diagrams. Grace's water filtration diagrams were objectively speaking excellent. The revised layer order she'd settled on coarse gravel, fine gravel, sand, activated charcoal, then a final layer she'd labeled biofilter still researching, was not only scientifically sound, but showed the particular combination of thoroughness and intellectual honesty that made Ethan simultaneously proud and a little humbled. The note about still researching was the part that got him. Most adults didn't write still researching on their conclusions. They pretended the conclusion was the whole story. "This is good," he said. "I know," she said without looking up from the revision she was already making to the legend. "I moved the sand layer because of what you said about particle size last week." "I said that off the top of my head." "I looked it up, and you were right." She made a precise mark with her pencil. "You usually are about the science things." "What am I not right about?" She looked up then briefly with the particular expression that was pure Jordan, that quick flicker of amusement that meant, "I have opinions, but I'm choosing not to share them right now." "We can talk about that another time," she said, and went back to the diagram. He let it go. He made 2 of them sandwiches, turkey no mustard on hers, double on his, and they sat at the kitchen table while she walked him through every revision, and he asked the follow-up questions she needed him to ask, because she was the kind of kid who solidified her thinking by being pushed on it. By 6:30, the diagrams were back in their folder, and Grace was doing homework, and Ethan was staring at his phone. Olivia had sent the draft statement at 4:12 p.m. He read it 3 times. It was good. Better than good, it was careful in all the right ways, specific without being clinical, and it said his name without making his name the headline. The headline it suggested in the version prepared for Olivia's own channels was this: "On systems that fail people, and the people who refuse to fail back." It talked about Granger County, about 22 miles, about what it meant that a man with 3 tours of combat medical experience was working security in a hospital, not because he lacked qualification, but because the systems around him had not created a place for what he actually was. It did not say black single dad. It said Ethan Ward, decorated Army combat medic and father, which was accurate, which was the whole shape of him, or close enough to the whole shape that it didn't distort him. He read the last paragraph twice. "I am not telling this story to make a hero. Ethan Ward would reject that framing, and he'd be right to. I'm telling this story because systems change when people inside them are seen clearly. Ethan Ward was not invisible because he was hiding. He was invisible because we were not looking. That is on us, not on him." He sat with that for a long moment. Then he typed the last paragraph. "Don't change a word." Her reply came back in under 2 minutes. That one I wrote 4 times. Glad it held. He typed, "The rest is approved. You can release it." A pause. Then, "Thank you for trusting me with it." He set the phone down and looked at the kitchen wall and thought about visibility, about the specific exhaustion of spending years being looked past and the specific strangeness of suddenly being looked at directly. Both required something from you. Being invisible required you to compress yourself into whatever shape people expected. Being seen required something different, the willingness to let the size of yourself be the actual size without apology or explanation. He wasn't sure he'd practiced that second one enough to be good at it. "Daddy?" Grace said from the living room, not looking up from her homework. "You have your thinking face on." "Nay." "How do you know you're not looking at me?" "I can hear it." He stood up and washed the sandwich plates and decided he was done thinking for the night. The statement went out the next morning at 8 a.m., posted simultaneously to Olivia's personal channels and the Heart Tech Communications platform, and by 9:15 it had been shared 40,000 times. By noon, it was 120,000. By the time Ethan clocked into his almost certainly last Friday night shift at St. Haven, the comment section contained the particular mixture of genuine human response and exhausting culture war noise that accompanied anything that touched race and class and competence in 21st century America. He didn't read the comments. He read the rounds clipboard and noted that the vending machine had finally, after 4 documented requests, been serviced. Small victories. Patricia Osei stopped him near the nurses' station at 11 p.m. She was still in the building at that hour, which told him something about her, and she looked at him with the expression of a woman who had made peace with an outcome she hadn't engineered. "I assume," she said, "that we're going to be losing you." "2 weeks if that works," he said. "I don't want to leave anyone short." She nodded. "Your replacement will be inadequate for at least 6 months. I want you to know that. Not as guilt, just as fact." "I'll write detailed handoff notes," he said. "Of course you will." She paused. "The CMO wants to talk to you about a consulting arrangement. Part-time, nothing that conflicts. Occasional training for ER security staff on emergency medical response." She looked at him. "There are things you know that our people don't, and it would be foolish not to find a way to keep access to that." "Tell him I'm open to the conversation," Ethan said. She put her hand out. He shook it. Her grip was firm, and her eyes were direct, and for a moment he felt the weight of what it meant to be leaving a place, even a place where he'd been invisible for 2 years, because invisible didn't mean without connection. It just meant the connections were quieter. "You're going to do important work," she said. "I hope so," he said. "Don't hope," she said. "Plan. You're too precise a person to hope." He almost laughed. She didn't wait for the response. She turned and walked back down the corridor with the efficient step of a woman who had 37 other things waiting. He watched her go. Then he did his rounds. The first complication arrived on Saturday morning. Not a big complication, or rather it was the size of complication that looked small from the outside and was larger from the inside, which was the worst kind. His phone rang at 7:49 while he was making eggs, and the number was one he recognized from a contact that had been dormant for 3 years, Ray Soto, who had been his unit commander for most of his second tour, and who had a way of calling only when something was worth calling about. "Ward?" Ray said when Ethan picked up. "Soto." He turned the burner down. "It's been a while. Saw the news." "Most people have." "I'm calling because I've already had 2 reporters reach out to me asking about your service record," Ray said. He had the direct, unhurried delivery of a man who had spent 20 years saying difficult things clearly. "They want confirmation of your commendations, your decorations, the Mertz incident." Ethan went still. "What about the Mertz incident?" "They found the incident report, partially. Enough to know something happened, not enough to know what. They're trying to fill in the gap." The Mertz incident was not something Ethan talked about. It was not something he had ever discussed publicly, and it was not something he intended to discuss publicly, because it involved a decision made under fire in the dark that he had made correctly and that had still cost 4 people their lives, including one of his own team. And the complexity of that fact was not the kind of thing that survived intact in a news cycle. "What did you tell them?" Ethan asked. "That I couldn't speak to specific incidents and that they needed to file a proper records request, which will take them 6 to 8 weeks. Ray paused. "But Ward, if they're pulling threads, they're going to find more. The commendation, the Bronze Star. The full picture is not a bad picture, but it's a complicated picture, and you need to decide whether you control how it comes out or whether you let it come out sideways." Ethan turned the eggs off entirely. "You need to talk to someone who manages this kind of thing," Ray said. "Someone on your side, not the company's PR people yours." "I don't have PR people." "You will whether you want them or not." A pause. "Listen, I'm not trying to scare you. What you did that night, what you've always done, it's good work and it deserves to be seen. I just don't want someone to take the hard parts of your record and use them to sand down the good parts. You understand me?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "I understand." "How are you doing? Really?" It was such a Ray Soto question, the pivot from tactical to human, in one breath, which was something Ethan had always respected about him. He thought about the honest answer. "I'm standing at my stove at 8 in the morning trying to figure out if my eggs are burned," he said. Ray laughed a short, genuine sound. "That's a fine problem to have." "It is," Ethan agreed. "Call Olivia Hart's people," Ray said. "Today, and Ethan, congratulations. You've been invisible long enough." He hung up. Ethan looked at the eggs. They were not burned. They were fine. He called Marcus Chen at 8:15. Marcus answered like a man who had been awake for 2 hours and was not surprised by the call. "The Mertz incident," Ethan said. A brief silence. "I've already been briefed on it," Marcus said. "By who?" "I have people who research people before Olivia has coffee with them. No offense." "None taken. What do you know?" "Third tour, Eastern Afghanistan, February. Your unit was ambushed during a medical supply run. You made a command decision that was later reviewed and officially cleared. You were commended. 4 people didn't make it home." Marcus's voice was level and factual and careful. "I know it's complicated." "It's not complicated," Ethan said. "It's tragic. That's different." "You're right," Marcus said. "I should have said tragic." A pause. "Do you want to talk about it publicly? Your choice entirely." "No," Ethan said. "Those 4 people have families. They have children, some of them. I'm not putting that story in a news cycle for 36 hours and then watching it disappear. If I ever talk about it, it'll be in a context where it can mean something and not just be consumed." "Then we don't talk about it," Marcus said. Simple as that. "It won't stay quiet if reporters are already pulling the incident report. Then we get ahead of it with what we can say, decorated service record, Bronze Star reviewed and cleared, no further comment on specific incidents out of respect for the families involved." He paused. "That's not evasion. That's exactly what it is." Ethan exhaled. "Okay, yeah, that works. I'll have the communication ready before end of day." Another pause, and then Marcus said something that Ethan had not expected from him, delivered in the same dry, efficient tone as everything else. "For what it's worth, Ward, what I've read about you, the whole thing, not just the Hart incident, I understand why she wants you in this role, and I'm revising my earlier assessment, which was that this was gratitude dressed as business. And now it's clearly business," Marcus said, "which is more sustainable." Coming from Marcus Chen, Ethan understood this as approximately the warmest thing the man was capable of saying. "I appreciate that," he said. "Don't tell Olivia I said it. She'll think she won an argument." "Did she?" "She usually does," Marcus said and hung up. The science fair was on Tuesday. Ethan had requested the morning off, one of the last things he'd need to request as a St. Haven employee, and he sat in the 3rd row of the Westbrook Elementary Gymnasium between Mrs. Delgado, who had dressed for the occasion with the seriousness of a woman attending a formal event, and a father he'd never met before, whose son's volcano project was set up 2 tables from Grace's filtration station. Grace was wearing her good cardigan. She'd chosen it herself and pressed it herself, which she'd been doing since she was 7, because she'd decided she liked the way pressed clothes felt, and Ethan had not argued with that development for 1 second. She stood behind her project with her hands clasped in front of her, and her chin level, and her eyes alert, and when the judging panel came to her table, she answered every question with the specificity of someone who had been preparing for exactly this. "Tell us about the biofilter layer," the judge. A woman in a school district polo said, pointing to the bottom of Grace's diagram. "That's the layer I'm still researching," Grace said without any embarrassment. "I know the science works, and I know it's used in some large-scale water treatment systems, but I didn't fully understand the microbiology yet, so I labeled it still researching instead of pretending I knew more than I did." The judge looked at her for a moment. "That's quite mature. My dad says the most important thing in science is knowing the difference between what you know and what you think you know," Grace said. "He says people get those 2 things mixed up all the time, and it costs them." The judge wrote something on her clipboard, moved on. Ethan became aware that Mrs. Delgado was gripping his arm. "She's going to win," Mrs. Delgado whispered. "You don't know that," he whispered back. "I know everything," Mrs. Delgado said with the absolute conviction of a woman who had lived long enough to feel entitled to that opinion. Grace won. First place with a judge's note that read, "Exceptional rigor, intellectual honesty, and clear presentation. Standout project." When they called her name, she walked to the front with the composure of someone who had expected this outcome, but had not allowed herself to fully believe it, until it was confirmed, which was a way of moving through the world that Ethan recognized deeply, because it was his. She held the ribbon with both hands on the walk back to their row. He held his arms out when she reached him, and she stepped into the hug without hesitation, still holding the ribbon, and he held her with the specific ferocity of a father who understood in every cell of his body what it cost to raise a person well and what it was worth when you saw them standing at the front of a room, unafraid and true. "Good," he said into the top of her head. "I told you," she said into his shoulder. "You told me." He agreed. Mrs. Delgado was crying. She denied it immediately when they pulled apart, but the evidence was on her face, and Grace solemnly handed her a tissue from the pocket of her good cardigan, which she had apparently come prepared with, and Mrs. Delgado laughed and cried at the same time, and Ethan thought that this particular Tuesday morning in a school gymnasium was the thing he'd been protecting for 6 years. Not a career, not a reputation, not a record. This, right here. He texted Diane a photo of Grace with the ribbon. Diane replied with 7 crying emojis, and then, "She is a ward." He texted Olivia without quite planning to. "She won." The reply came back fast. "Of course she did. Tell her a woman in Granger County is very impressed." He showed Grace the text. Grace read it carefully. "Is that the lady?" she asked. "That's the lady." Grace considered for a moment. Then she took the phone and typed slowly and deliberately with both thumbs. "Thank you. My dad told me what you're building. I think it's important." She handed the phone back. Ethan looked at the message, then at his daughter. "When did you decide that?" he said. "I've been thinking about it since Friday," she said, with the practicality of a 9-year-old who had allocated 2 days to a significant question and arrived at her conclusion. 22 miles is too far." He sat with that for a second. Then he sent the message. The 3 dots appeared on Olivia's end, stayed there longer than usual. Then, "Tell her she's right. And that we're going to fix it." The complication that mattered, the one that wasn't a reporter, or a press cycle, or a logistical question about notice periods and role transitions, arrived on Wednesday evening, in the form of Ethan's own mind, doing what it occasionally did, which was to locate the fault line in something good and press on it until it either held or it didn't. He was on the bus home from his second-to-last shift when it happened. He was sitting in the back, watching the city go by outside the window, and he was thinking about the Heart Community Response Division, and the field training program, and the first assignment in March, and all of it was the right size for him, the right weight, the right shape, and that was exactly the problem. Because the last time something had been the right size and the right weight, it had been Jordan. And Jordan was gone. In an ordinary car on an ordinary Tuesday, on a road that wasn't supposed to be dangerous. Gone in the time it took him to be somewhere else, doing something else, not paying attention to the wrong thing, because he was paying attention to the right thing, and the universe had not cared about the difference. He'd had this conversation with the therapist on the Army's required mental health track, and he'd had it again with the counselor at the VA, and he genuinely understood that what he was feeling was not a premonition. It was not insight. It was a nervous system that had been trained by loss to treat good things as potential ammunition for the next loss, which was not wisdom. It was just pain wearing wisdom's clothes. He knew all of that. He still felt it. His stop came, and he got off the bus and walked the 4 blocks to his building. And when he got to the door, he stood outside in the cold for a moment, looking up at the lit window of their apartment. Grace was home. Mrs. Delgado had drop-off today, and he made himself stand there with all of it for a minute. The fear and the hope and the grief that hadn't fully resolved itself, and probably never would, and the particular ache of wanting something again after a long time of not allowing himself to want things. Then he went inside. Grace was at the table not doing homework, which meant homework was already done. She was drawing not a school project, just drawing for herself, which she did when she was processing something. She looked up when he came in. "You have your other thinking face," she said. "I have too. You have at least 4, she said. "This one is the one where you're scared of something good." He stopped in the doorway of the kitchen. He looked at his 9-year-old daughter, who had apparently been cataloging his emotional expressions for some time. "I'm not scared," he said. It came out less convincing than he intended. "Daddy." "Grace." She set down her pencil. "Mom's not coming back," she said. Simply, without cruelty, the way she said true things that were hard. "You know that. I know that. And she would be really mad if she saw you standing in the doorway being scared of good things." He felt the hit of it sharp and clean, the way her direct observations always hit him. "She would," he said. "So stop," Grace said, and picked up her pencil again. He stood there for another second. Then he walked to the table and sat down across from her and watched her draw. She was drawing something with layers, he realized, which was probably subconscious. Probably the filtration diagram converting itself into art in her mind. And he thought about what Diane had said. The things that cost everything have a way of being worth everything too. He thought about Ray Soto. "You've been invisible long enough." He thought about Dr. Keene on the landing. "Take the meeting with heart. It needs someone who counts." He thought about Grace. "Maybe now you can do both." He pulled out his phone and opened the draft email he'd been composing and deleting for 2 days, the formal acceptance letter to Heart Community Response, addressed to Olivia. Heart CC, Marcus Chen, structured appropriately, all the right language in all the right places, and this time he didn't delete it. He read it once more. Then he pressed send. His phone buzzed 30 seconds later. Not an email. A text from the handwritten card number. "Welcome aboard, Ethan Ward." And then a moment later, "Grace is going to love March." He set the phone down on the table. Grace looked up from her drawing, read his face. He had 4 expressions apparently, and this was none of the ones she'd cataloged, and she smiled at him. The smile that was all her own, not Jordan's, not his, just Grace's. The smile that was the whole reason for everything. "You sent it," she said. Not a question. "I sent it," he said. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her drawing. "Mrs. Delgado says dinner is in the fridge," she said. "She made the pasta, with the good seasoning this time." "How do you know?" "I supervised." Grace said. He laughed, the full one, the real one, the kind that lived in his chest and came out when something surprised him into it, and he got up to get the pasta. And the apartment was warm, and outside the window the city moved through its ordinary evening, and Ethan Ward stood at his kitchen counter and felt for the first time in longer than he could precisely measure like the shape of his life was finally the right size for who he actually was. He served the pasta. He sat down across from his daughter. She told him about a book she was reading and a disagreement she'd had with Marcus Reyes in math, the other Marcus, the school one, about whether 0 was a real number or just a concept. A dispute she had strong opinions about and intended to win. He listened to every word. This was the job, the main one, the one that had preceded every other job and would outlast them all. He'd been doing it for 9 years, and he intended to do it for the rest of his life, and he was, despite everything, because of everything, very, very good at it. The first day at Hart Tech Industries, Ethan wore the wrong thing. Not wrong in any dramatic sense, not a security uniform, not anything that would have drawn attention. He wore the dark slacks he'd bought for Jordan's funeral, and had since worn to every occasion that required something more than work clothes, paired with a button-down that Grace had ironed with great ceremony the night before, and presented to him like a gift. He looked fine. He looked appropriate. But when he walked into the Hart Tech lobby, and the receptionist, a young man with the kind of practiced warmth that came from excellent training, said, "Mr. Ward, Ms. Hart is expecting you on the 14th floor." Ethan became acutely aware that he was a man who had spent the last 6 years in a uniform, and that the absence of a uniform meant something he hadn't fully prepared for. It meant he had to just be himself. No role to disappear into. No title that explained his function before he had to. He took the elevator to 14. Marcus was waiting when the doors opened, which Ethan had already come to understand was simply how Marcus operated. He materialized in the correct location, slightly before he was needed, like a well-calibrated system. "Good morning," Marcus said. "Morning," Ethan said. He looked around the floor. Open plan, purposeful energy people moving with the particular velocity of a company that believed in what it was building. "Am I early?" "You're 11 minutes early," Marcus said, "which I've now come to expect." He turned and walked, and Ethan followed. Orientation this morning is with HR standard onboarding benefits. Confirmation the usual. Afternoon is with the Hart Community Response Team. There are 4 people currently on that team, all of whom have been told to expect you, and all of whom are... He paused very slightly. "Curious." "Curious how?" "You're a figure to them," Marcus said without inflection. The news cycle helped and hurt simultaneously. They respect the record. They're not sure yet what to make of the attention that comes with it. He glanced at Ethan. "I'm telling you because I think you'd rather know than not know." "I would," Ethan said. "Thank you." "Don't mention it." He stopped outside a glass-walled conference room. Through the glass, Ethan could see a woman setting up a laptop with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this exact setup 50 times. "HR is Sarah Chin. She's excellent. And Ward..." Marcus looked at him directly, which was not something Marcus did casually. "The people on that team have been working without a director for 11 months. They've kept the work going by themselves on momentum and belief. Don't lead with the attention. Lead with the work." Ethan looked at him. "That's good advice." "I have my moments," Marcus said, and walked away. Sarah Chin was excellent. The benefits confirmation was for the first time in Ethan's working life, the kind that made him sit very still in his chair and read every line twice, because the numbers were real, and the coverage was real, and the sentence that said dependents covered no limit was not a sentence he'd seen on a benefits form before. He initialed where she pointed without letting his face do anything, which required some effort. By 2 in the afternoon, he was in a different conference room, smaller, lived in, with a whiteboard that had clearly been erased and rewritten so many times. The surface had a permanent gray undertone, facing 4 people who looked at him with the particular combination of hope and assessment that he recognized from the first day with any new unit. He'd always handled first days the same way in the field talk: less ask, more listen, like your life depends on it. "Tell me what you're working on," he said. "Not what's in the brief. What's actually happening on the ground." Mas. The four of them, Priya, who turned out to be the same wide-eyed first-year nurse he'd seen in the ER the night Olivia came in, and who had since left clinical work for health tech policy. Daniel, a former paramedic from rural Mississippi. Cora, an epidemiologist with a specialty in underserved community health systems. And James, a 28-year-old from East Oakland, who wrote code and had never been in a clinical setting in his life, but understood community infrastructure better than anyone else in the room, looked at each other for half a second in the way of people deciding whether to give the polished version or the real one. Daniel spoke first, which told Ethan something about him. "We've got 3 pilot communities in the program right now," he said. "Southwest Georgia, Eastern Kentucky, and the Central Valley in California. We have the tech deployed. We have the alert systems running. What we don't have is enough trained people on the ground to use them when it actually matters." He leaned forward. "The gap isn't the product. The gap is the human layer. People get trained once, and then they're on their own. No follow-up, no reinforcement, no one to call when a situation doesn't look like the training scenario. 6 months in, the training fades. They revert to what they know, which is usually not enough." "What's the longest you've sustained a training cycle with any of the 3 communities?" Ethan asked. 8 weeks, Cora said. "Georgia. We had a health system partner who gave us access and time. After 8 weeks, retention was measurably better. But 8 weeks requires personnel on the ground that we don't have." "Yet," James said, with the pointed optimism of someone who had been waiting a long time to be able to say yet. Ethan looked at the whiteboard. Someone had written in faded marker a phrase that was half erased but still readable: "Train the trainer." "That," he said, pointing. "That's the model we keep coming back to," Priya said. "But we haven't had anyone who knows how to build it from the field up. We know the theory. We don't." She stopped. "You don't know what it looks like when the theory meets a real situation in a community that doesn't look like the case study," Ethan said. "Yes," she said. "Exactly." He nodded. He pulled the chair out and sat down properly, not the way he'd been sitting, the slightly formal, still finding the edges way, but the way he sat when he was working. "Okay," he said. "Tell me about Georgia. Start from the beginning." They told him. All 4 of them, passing the thread back and forth, with the ease of a team that had been working together long enough to know whose knowledge covered which part of the story. And Ethan listened in the way Ray Soto had once told him was his most valuable skill: not waiting to respond, not building his answer while they talked, but actually receiving what was being said and letting it settle into the picture before he moved. By 5 p.m., they had covered all 3 communities, and half the whiteboard was covered in Ethan's handwriting. Not plans, not conclusions, just questions and categories, and the beginnings of a framework that wasn't fully visible yet, but was starting to have edges. "You write fast," James observed. "I think fast," Ethan said. "I write to keep up with myself." "Can you read it back?" Ethan looked at the board. Read back every word perfectly without pausing. James stared at him. "How?" "Another habit," Ethan said. He uncapped the marker again. "Georgia. The trainer you used, what was her background?" "Community health worker. 20 years in the county system," Cora said. "She was the one who made it work. The communities trusted her before we showed up. We just gave her better tools." "That's the model," Ethan said. "That's where it starts. Not with us going in. With us finding the person who's already trusted and making them more capable." He wrote existing trust infrastructure in capitals and drew a box around it. Every one of those communities has someone like that. A church deacon who everyone calls in a crisis. A school nurse who's been there 15 years. A volunteer firefighter who knows every road in the county. They already have the relationships. We build the skill on top of what already exists. He looked at the team. That's how you make it last. You don't build a program. You grow a person. The room was quiet for a moment. Daniel said, That's what we've been trying to articulate for 8 months. You articulated it fine, Ethan said. You just needed someone to confirm it wasn't wrong. He said it simply without performance, and the effect was exactly what he'd intended. Not a leader establishing authority, but a person landing alongside people who'd been doing good work without enough acknowledgement and letting them know he saw it. Priya looked at the whiteboard, then at Ethan. You were really in that ER the night? Yes, he said. I was there, she said. I was the one who handed you the kit. He looked at her. He hadn't made the connection until now. She'd been one of the faces in the periphery of that night, too many things happening at once to hold every detail. You moved fast, he said. You moved faster, she said. I didn't know what was happening for about 3 seconds, and then I understood, and I ran. She paused. I left clinical work 6 months after that night. Not because of that, for other reasons. But I think about it sometimes. The way you knew exactly what to do, and exactly how much time you had. You get that from practice, he said. Which is why we're going to build 8-week cycles with real scenario training, not just procedural walkthroughs. The goal is decision speed, not memorizing steps trusting your hands. She nodded slowly. How long will it take to build that curriculum? I'll have a draft in 3 weeks, he said. I'll need all of you to break it. Break it, Daniel said. Find every place it fails. Every assumption it makes about resources that won't exist in the field. Every step that works in a classroom and falls apart in a parking lot at 2 a.m. He looked at each of them in turn. I write it. You try to break it, we fix what breaks. That's how you build something that holds. The meeting ended at 6:15. Ethan was the last one out of the conference room, and he stood for a moment in the now empty space, looking at the whiteboard full of his own handwriting, and he thought about 63 needle decompressions, and he thought about the 22 miles that had built this company, and he thought about a tent in eastern Afghanistan, and he thought about Jordan's voice saying, I'll be home by 6, and he thought about Grace's hands folded in her lap listening seriously. He picked up the eraser. He didn't erase the board. He just held it for a moment, the way you held a thing you weren't ready to put down yet. Then he set it back on the tray and turned off the light. Olivia found him at the elevator. She was coming from the opposite end of the floor, moving with slightly more ease than she had at Morrow's. The chest tube had been out for 4 days, which apparently made a considerable difference, and she had the look of someone at the tail end of a long day who was still running at full capacity, which he was coming to understand was simply her baseline. How was the team? She asked, falling into step beside him. Good, he said. Really good. They've been building the right thing without enough structural support to build it properly. That's fixable. She pressed the elevator button. Marcus said the meeting ran an hour over. We had things to cover. He also said you filled the entire whiteboard. It's a small board, Ethan said. She smiled, not the almost smile from the hospital corridor, a real one, and he was aware of its effect on him in the way he was aware of other things he was not yet doing anything about. Come on, she said. I want to show you something before you head out. The elevator opened and they went up instead of down, which he hadn't expected. The top floor of Heart Tech was not the executive floor that was 12. The top floor was, it turned out, a space that wasn't on the public directory, and which Olivia opened with a keycard, and which was essentially a large open room with maps. Floor-to-ceiling maps on 3 walls pushed pins and route markers, and a density of annotation that told the history of a decade of work on the single question of where people fell through the cracks. He stood in the middle of the room and turned slowly. Every community we've worked in, she said from behind him. Every pilot, every partner, every failed attempt, and every one that held. She walked to the east wall. This is Georgia. This red pin is the county where the 8-week cycle ran. She touched a blue pin nearby. This is the county 40 miles north where we tried the same model without the right community partner, and it didn't take. Same technology, different human layer. She looked at him. That's what you were talking about downstairs. Yes. I've known that was the problem for 3 years. she said. I haven't been able to build the solution because I haven't had the right person to build it with me. She said it plainly, not as flattery, but as fact. The job description I wrote for this role went through 9 drafts. Every draft kept coming back to the same need: someone who understood medicine and communities and people and failure. Not theoretically, in their body. She paused. You understand failure in your body. He turned to look at her. Is that a compliment? It's an observation, she said. Compliment is in the eye of the beholder. He looked back at the maps. He found, without trying to find it, the county in eastern Kentucky that Daniel had described, the one with the worst response times, the least infrastructure, the community that needed the work most urgently, and had the least existing capacity to receive it. A small cluster of pins. Not many of them. March, he said. March, she agreed. That's where we start. He studied the map for a moment. The distances, the roads, the space between the pins that represented all the places the infrastructure hadn't reached yet. 22 miles multiplied across 10 states, multiplied across 100 counties, multiplied across the years it had been this way before anyone decided to build something about it. It's a lot of ground, he said. It is, she said. You still want to cover it. He turned to look at her. She was watching him with the same attention she'd given him in the ER corridor, the night she'd walked toward him in the wheelchair, that particular quality of seeing that didn't look past him or through him, but directly at him, the full-size version without flinching. Yeah, he said. I do. She nodded once. Good. They stood for a moment in the map room with the whole unfinished geography of the problem around them, and he thought that this was what the right work felt like. Not easy, not simple, not without cost, but exactly the right weight for the hands that were going to carry it. He got home at 7:48. Grace was at the kitchen table, homework done, working on a new drawing. She looked up when he came in the door. How was it? She said. He hung his jacket on the hook, looked at his daughter. Good, he said. Really good. Did you fill up a whiteboard? He stopped. How do you know about the whiteboard? Mrs. Delgado says when you were in the Army, you always filled up the whiteboards at every briefing, and it drove people crazy because your handwriting is small. He stared. When did Mrs. Delgado? She talks to Aunt Diane sometimes, Grace said serenely. They're friends now. He stood in the kitchen doorway and made a private note to have a conversation with Diane about the particular boundaries of sisterly involvement, a conversation that would accomplish nothing because Diane had never respected those boundaries in their entire shared lifetime and was not going to begin now. I filled up the whiteboard, he confirmed. Grace nodded, satisfied, like this was important data. Are you going to save people? She asked, not dramatically, just wanting to know. He thought about the maps, the pins, the 22 miles, the 8-week cycles, and the community health workers who could become something more with the right tools in their hands. He thought about Daniel's paramedic hands, and Priya's fast feet, and Cora's epidemiological precision, and James's unshakable belief in yet. He thought about a county in eastern Kentucky, and all the ordinary Tuesdays between now and March when the work would get built piece by piece, decision by decision, one more person trained to trust their hands. He thought about 63. That number would grow. Yeah, baby, he said. I think I am. She went back to her drawing. He went to the kitchen and started dinner. Real dinner, not sandwiches, the kind that took time, and the apartment filled up with the smell of something being made from scratch, which was his preference for most things. And outside the window, the city did what cities did, which was to keep moving without pausing to register that inside this particular apartment, in this particular kitchen, something had shifted permanently into a better alignment. He had a second thought while the oil heated and called Diane. She answered first ring. You sent the email, she said. Weeks ago, he said. I know. I'm allowed to be happy about it retroactively. A pause. How was today? He told her about the team, about the maps, about Eastern Kentucky in March. She listened the way she always listened to him, completely without rushing to the response. When he finished, she said, "You sound like yourself." He thought about that, about what it meant to sound like yourself after a long time of sounding like a compressed version of yourself. "I think I am," he said. "Jordan would be proud of you," Diane said, simply without theater. "I want you to know that. She was always the first one to say you were too big for the uniform you'd put yourself in." He stood at the stove and felt that land in him, felt it move through the places that were still tender and the places that had healed and the places that were both at once, which was most of him. "I know," he said. "I'm starting to believe it." "Mom." "Good," Diane said. "Now go feed my niece." He laughed. "Love you, Dee." "Love you. Call me from Kentucky." He hung up and stirred the pan and called out, "Grace, set the table." And she appeared from nowhere, the way 9-year-olds did, already pulling silverware from the drawer, telling him about the drawing she'd been working on. It was a map, she said, of the water system in their neighborhood, because she'd been reading about infrastructure, and she thought it was interesting how most people used things every day without knowing how they worked. "Like what?" he asked. "Like water," she said, "and bridges, and hospitals." She arranged the forks carefully. "And people." He looked at her. "People use each other every day," she said with the authority of someone who had thought about this seriously. "Without knowing how they work. I think you should know how people work." "How do you know how they work?" he asked. She considered the question with the gravity it deserved. "You pay attention," she said. "And you don't pretend you understand something when you're still researching it." He served the food. They sat down. She said Grace she'd started doing this herself at 7 unprompted, and he had never asked her to stop because it seemed to mean something to her that was hers and not borrowed from anywhere. And then she picked up her fork and told him 3 more things about municipal water infrastructure, and he listened to every word. This was the life. Not the one he'd planned. He'd stopped making that category of plan a long time ago because planning required a confidence in the future that grief had corrected out of him. But the life that had assembled itself from what he'd done and what he'd survived and what he'd refused to let go of. Grace. The work. The knowledge that his hands knew how to help and that there were people willing to build something around that knowledge and give it a wider reach. He thought about the bench outside the east entrance of St. Haven, where he'd sat in the pre-dawn dark, drinking cold coffee, and looking at parking lot lights going orange in the sky, wondering if he trusted something that arrived this fast. He thought about Olivia's face in the map room, the full-size version of him reflected back without flinching. He thought about the whiteboard and the questions and the beginnings of a framework that was starting to have edges. He thought briefly, honestly, and then let himself move past it about Jordan and about the particular shape of loving someone you'd lost. How it didn't get smaller with time, but it did get more portable, easier to carry alongside the other things, not replacing them and not replaced by them. Grace was talking about bridges now. She had transitioned from water systems to bridge engineering with the fluid logic of a child's mind, and she was explaining with considerable technical confidence for a 9-year-old why suspension bridges worked and cable-stayed bridges worked differently, and how the key in both cases was distributing the weight correctly, so no single point carried too much. He listened. "Do you understand?" she asked, having reached the end of her explanation. "I do," he said. She looked at him with those direct, patient, unavoidable eyes. "Are you really listening, or are you thinking about work?" "Both," he said honestly. She accepted this. "What are you thinking about work?" He looked at his daughter across the kitchen table, and he thought about 22 miles and the spaces between the pins and the people who were already trusted and just needed better tools, and the 8-week cycles that would grow into something that lasted. "I'm thinking about weight distribution," he said. "How you build something that holds." Grace considered this seriously. "You need the right structure," she said. "And you need people who know how to help carry it." "Yes," he said. "Exactly that." She nodded and went back to her food, satisfied the way she always was when she'd explained something correctly and been understood. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary evening. Inside the apartment, the light was warm, and the food was good, and his daughter was talking about bridges, and Ethan Ward, combat medic father. The man nobody had seen clearly for a very long time sat at his kitchen table and let himself be without compression exactly who he was. Which was, it turned out, more than enough. It had always been more than enough. He just finally had a place big enough to put it.